Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and today I've shown you guys a little bit of a hack going on over here, ladies and gentlemen. What would you do if somebody broke into your computer and started using it for all sort of illegal things? How would you even know, ladies and gentlemen? Well, today something massive happened. Actually, yesterday, a website was shut down, netnut.com. Now, jokes aside with the goofy name, you can see that there's a whole ensemble of characters here. You got Google, you got Lumen, you got the FBI, you've got the Internal Revenue Service. You know, there are supervillains in society that are scared of this badge right here. But basically, this was seized by the Federal Bureau in accordance with federal law, taken in coordination with the Department of Justice against the NetNut residential proxy platform. So you might be like, well, what the fuck is NetNut, Muta? Well, I'm going to walk you through the entire nerdiness right here. Now, NetNut, from what I understand, is an entire residential proxy service. So kind of think of it like this, right? Basically, how do a lot of those big AI slot models get all the information off the internet? How do they scrape things, right? Well, apparently they go through a lot of these services like NetNut, where again, if you're a big company that wants to get a bunch of data, if you're somebody that wants to grab a bunch of information, you build an account over here, you pay these guys an exorbitant amount of cash, and you get access to a whole bunch of information that is hidden behind residential proxies. So if you look at the amount of proxies that they have, they've got 2.3 million in the United States, over half a million in Canada, over 1 million in India, 500,000 in Russia, and so on and so forth. Now, residential proxy is somebody's home network that these people are apparently routing this information through. So how did this all kind of happen, ladies and gentlemen? How was NetNut exposed? So for, I would say, probably a few months to a year, organizations like Google were kind of jumping in over here and shutting down things like IPAdia. Also, they were shutting out botnets like Popa. So a botnet, for anybody that isn't understanding, let me walk you through it, right? Imagine this is your simple little Windows computer, right? You're opening up your little web browser, you're going on newgrounds.com, and you might be looking up something like Sonic Inflation. Now, you might think your computer is safe, but a filthy hacker has already breached in. Now, this is a Kali virtual machine, which I have set in a way to send a piece of malware over to a system, this victim. And you can see right over here, I'm not going to walk you through how I hacked it, but you can see that I opened up a shell on this computer. So while this guy's just minding his own business, I can pull up things like what this person's computer looks like. If I wanted to exactly pull up, what this person was looking at, like let's say they went to newgrounds.com over here. I don't know, I've been thinking of Newgrounds a lot. You get the idea. I can just hit the old screenshot button and actually get a screenshot of what this person's looking at. So you can see it saved it in my Kali folder. So I can actually open up my Kali system right here. Open a folder. Go right over here. You can see that I've got the screenshot from the guy that I've hacked. Now, while this computer is doing effectively nothing, I can use that shell that I made over here to do commands like curl, to check the internet, to pull whatever information I want. Now, this is kind of a roundabout way to walk you through exactly what's kind of going on. Basically, the reason for that visual was to show you, there are people that could use your computer without you kind of knowing, unless you know how to audit your process tree, dump your memory, check everything going on. The issue here is not your individual computer being hacked, it's somebody being able to use your computer network or your home network through malicious applications, through malicious IP relays, and be able to route traffic that is basically happening without your consent. Without your consent is important here. It actually lied entirely on those cheapo handset devices that you're buying on the internet. So effectively, let's say you're somebody that, you want to watch some TV, right? Let's say you're somebody that also doesn't have a smart television. So you might be like, well, what's the cheapest way to get access to a smart TV where I can have different, live TV applications, Netflix, so on and so forth? You probably go online and look for Android TV boxes. And you could go to places like Amazon.com and find a whole range of them. Some of them could be in the $50, some of them could be $100. So the reality of it is, it turns out that these boxes could actually be used to basically run these botnets in your home without you knowing. So you buy these cheapo devices, and it turns out that they're connected to a Void botnet, a large-scale malware campaign, which is basically with these unofficial Android-based boxes, right? So anytime somebody sells you something for cheap like this, usually there's a caveat, and the caveat is your home is, without your consent, turned into a residential proxy. So in this case, the FBI basically detected, and Google as well detected, like hundreds of people using these residential proxies for nasty things. And this is where you come into the story. In June 2026 alone, Google identified like 300 plus distinct threat clusters using the NetNut exit nodes. Who are the exit nodes? That's you, basically giving your IP to mask these criminals and espionage groups behind. These guys use NetNut to effectively mask their IP address when accessing victims' environments. Because here's the thing. Much like accessing through a VPN, a lot of those things are known IP addresses. Now, NetNut is obviously a company that is owned by Israel. And before I get the ADL bitching at me about, oh my God, are you promoting the anti-Semitism? No, I'm talking about Israel specifically, okay? I ain't making no jokes about your IP being promised 3,000 fucking years ago. No, the one of the realities is Israel has always been a very notorious country when it comes to, again, having access to spyware, having access to these sort of gray market firms that, you know, work with law enforcement agencies, but really the reality of it is that they do put a lot of journalists, you know, there are a lot of actual politicians that we put our, you know, faith into. A lot of people do end up being targets of some pretty nasty Israeli malware. To the point where obviously big tech companies in the United States call this shit out on a pretty regular basis. And when pushed too far, obviously this invokes the ire of like US law enforcement. Now, of course, in this situation, Alarum is a company that is obviously traded on the market. They're a legitimate company, unfortunately, in the, you know, things that they deal. Because remember, they're more like a traffic vendor than people selling like a botnet for illegal criminals. These criminals that are, I guess, using their NetNut, you know, residential proxy service are not people that are sanctioned. Remember, we are targeting people that are using their service in a non-consensual manner. There's a lot of people that do consent to NetNut, unfortunately, which obviously the case here is we're targeting the non-consensual use of their network by cyber criminals. So the FBI is investigating whether this of a data collection firm, Alarum Technologies, who are basically the guys that own the NetNut stuff, had a role in linking customers' home internet devices without their consent into a network that people can use to disguise their location. It turns out that maybe the FBI, which was basically examining these links from NetNut, that Israeli-based subsidiary that sells access to the network, and software known as POPA, the actual like botnet software that was used. Basically, these devices were flashed with the stuff before they were fucking sold. So you buy this shit and you're thinking, oh man, I'm just gonna have a rootin' tootin' good time and watch Netflix, you know, on my smart TV now that, you know, I bought through this Android device. And in reality, you probably can watch Netflix, but the thing is, ultimately, at the end of the day, you are now part of a fucking insane botnet. And if you look into this botnet really carefully, you can see that ultimately, at the end of the day, this is contributing to the destruction of the internet. Just this one SEC filing from the guys over at Alarum showed that over the past year, Alarum went from a proxy-focused provider into the AI data platform. So basically, all these AI companies, when they're grabbing shit off the internet, and you can see that obviously they include things like their proxy network, website unblocker, SERP solution. So if you're an AI company, you obviously want to go to these people, or anybody that wants to look legitimate on the internet, you go to these guys. You know, here's the thing. If you try accessing a lot of websites from an AI, it'll probably tell you like error 403, like, hey, we know you're a bot, fuck off. But then there's other alternatives and options that you can use, right? Like you could connect yourself through something like CamoFox, for instance, which is a anti-detection browser. So if I pair this with an AI running locally, I can browse the internet and basically scrape whatever I want without me, you know, triggering an anti-bot detection. So with a culmination of technologies, these people have website unblockers, search engine solutions, AI data sets. Basically, they're just a fucking massive data collection company. And I guess because they're headquartered in like Israel, which is basically the cyber mercenary solution of the world. You know, I'll be honest with you, the fucking problem with like, anything cybersecurity related is like, Israel's got a lot of fucking great talent, right? When it comes to like fucking, just a lot of their cybersecurity solutions, like ultimately at the end of the day, are sought after by law enforcement agencies and governments all over the world, right? So interestingly enough, the government of the United States that is actually working against this company in Israel, the same government was paying another Israeli company to be able to hack into people's like iPhones, right? I mean, this is like gray market. We will fucking kind of work for the highest bidder type solution, right? Now, I don't want to say anything out of pocket for something like Elerum. From what I understand, they're kind of shocked a little bit that this fucking happened. The day that this actually broke down, I shit you not, the stock price for Elerum like went to fucking shit. So for instance, in the span of like 3 days, these motherfuckers dropped down 69%, okay? Like imagine going all the way from here to here. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, they really were just kind of shocked that their domains were getting seized by the Federal Bureau, by the Internal Revenue Service. Google's fucking pointing fingers, you know what I mean? It's crazy shit. You're talking about some of the biggest data collection companies in the world pointing fingers. It's like that Spider-Man meme. But at the end of the day, I think ultimately the most important part about this is how do you stay safe? And this is where, look, ultimately there's a few things you can do, like don't use shady applications you downloaded from unverified sources because they're usually bundled with these proxies. Stop using free VPN services. For instance, right over here, a great write-up by the fellows over at Deepfield. They kind of did talk a little bit about this, right? RoboVPN, for instance, is this commercial VPN from CyberKick Limited. Now, who the fuck owns CyberKick Limited? Well, let's look a little bit closer. Let's look at that. Alarum FAQ belongs to the same Israeli company, CyberKick. We're incorporated in Israel. Blanket security for customers against all forms of spooky viruses. But again, a write-up from these individuals at, again, Deepfield, showed that basically, at the end of the day, the site's download page advertises clients for everything, right? You can download it for whatever. Bundled in the same installer, registered as a NuGet dependency and activated whenever the VPN is not connected, is Nunitive, a residential proxy SDK that turns the user machine into an exit node for third-party traffic. When the VPN disconnects, or the app simply sits idle after login, the SDK waits 30 to 90 minutes, connects to a load balancer at this address, receives a list of relay servers on rotating front domains, and starts accepting tunnel requests that resolve arbitrary public host names through the user's connection. Relay always exits through the user's own residential IP. Now, the important aspect about it is, because they're routing through your IP address, it makes, like, for instance, if you're a website and you want to, like, block these scumbags, it makes it difficult because ultimately you're blocking, like, a real legitimate customer, right? You're blocking somebody that could just be a real human being. It makes identification really fucking difficult. And again, these are people that track DDoS botnets, right? So effectively, they were looking into it because ultimately, at the end of the day, a vulnerable proxy SDK is itself an initial access vector. A customer who tunnels to a node's own reaches the exit device's ADB daemon and recruits it into whatever the operator is building. So how did the story kind of break this, like, rapidly? Well, it actually was brewing for about a year. So to give you an idea, this is a website known as Arij.net. Now, Arij.net seems like your standard journalism website, but basically they were protected by the only company that could actually reverse engineer all this. So Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism received this massive scraping event targeting its library of investigations, actually 10,000 times higher than regular scraping traffic. So effectively, what they did was they weren't naming who actually did anything, but they reconstructed the methodology of how the scraping had occurred. And over here, they kind of started pointing the fingers towards NetNut, again, these Israeli companies, and they kind of, matched the methodology to what they were seeing over here. Now, about a month later, they started to talk about the Popa botnet, for instance, right? And this is where they started introducing things like your smart TV. So it wasn't just like a bunch of like these, it was actually like several like really good write-ups by Nokia, by Synthient, by all these people that were basically pointing fingers at NetNut and how a lot of these like scrapers were hiding in people's like cheapo Android television boxes, right? Basically, when they started looking and reverse engineering the Android applications that allowed things like that void malware to basically download and update itself, they were looking at all of this shit, right? They were going through the entire chain over here. And then, of course, further down the road, they had started to link this botnet to the Israeli proxy provider NetNut. So they started looking closer into a company, for instance, right? For example, over here, when they were looking at a client known as SmartTube, which, again, SmartTube really wasn't connected to it, like at all. Like, I don't believe that they were actually brought in. But to give you an idea, according to the researchers, it was manipulated in some ways back in 2025 of November. And effectively, one specific version over here, right, 28.56. So basically, POPA ran undetected for about 5 months inside, some of these applications, legitimate-looking applications too. And the central lead in the report points to a guy called Moshe Yehuda Kramer, who registered this company called Ninja Tech in Riga in 2020. So this company was liquidated in 2022, but its domain continued to serve as a control server for POPA. According to Corium, Kramer is the SVP Research and Development at NetNut, according to, again, Alarum's own website. So interestingly enough, when you look into this, this is why, organizations like the Internal Revenue Service are kind of brought in, because again, it's not that they were working with these researchers. Google, and specifically the FBI and the IRS, they were doing this in silent for a year too. So the reason why the IRS are kind of brought into this is because really the important aspect here is identifying the money trail. See, if the Internal Revenue Service's CI division can identify and basically piece together the money movement, that'll, I believe, and again, I'm not an investigator like a police officer here, but I at least I can tell you this from my understanding, that it would build sort of like a motive trail. A money trail can be established to showcase the connection. The IRS is brought in specifically because they are the following the money type of investigators, and they obviously have more expertise there than, the FBI or any of the other federal agencies. So again, I wanted to verify if there was any device on my network, not that I was really worried, but basically I made myself a little Pi hole, which is a small little Raspberry Pi that sits on my home network, effectively blocking any form of like advertisement, right? So for instance, when I'm browsing the internet or any device connected to my entire system is browsing, it actually blocks a fair amount of trackers and ads and scummy things. I made a video on it a while back showing you how to set this up for yourself. You set it up once, never really have to look at it except maybe for a few updates and general maintenance. But yeah, you can see that I block a whole bunch of nasty shit that I don't want on my system. So the realistic part about it was I accessed the filtering and I was like, all right, let me look for NetNut. And aside from my own computer, basically me going to the actual website for showing you in this video, I didn't get anything on my system, right? If there was something maliciously connected, I could identify any domain that was being accessed that normally would not be something I was okay with. And then I could find the IP address or host, rip that shit out of my network, and stop being a fucking slave to this scummy Israeli fucking residential proxy provider, man. Like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? There's a reason why the FBI jumps in and goes into it, because yes, there are criminals that use these networks to hide behind when they're doing terribly shitty things, And again, you can see that they were even so proud of anonymous proxies that they even had a patent that they talked about it too, right? Unlike conventional proxies, where proxy service client requests would be rerouted through an intermediate proxy device, thus potentially slowing down the connection and exposing a device's local network to security risks, NetNut's reflector method achieves the same end result without such detour. It cleverly uses the IP address of an intermediate device to initiate the connection, and after this initial step, client requests are sent directly to the target server. The method retains the benefit of using the proxy while masking the original IP address and avoiding the usual bottleneck of channeling all traffic through a third-party device, right? So again, they're finding clever ways to kind of protect themselves, but still use you as the public face for them scraping and fucking up the internet, right? Now, obviously, the reality of this too was that when the actual independent researchers came out and basically confronted these people, like the Alarum Technologies, they're like, yeah, these reports contain inaccurate assertions and flawed deductions, right? There was even like, I guess you could say, like the legal threats were kind of brought in, where they said they reserved the right to sue anyone publishing reports that might besmirch the company's brand, right? Again, I don't know if like a personal opinion or like a technical write-up is necessarily down for defamation, but again, it's America. You can sue anybody for anything. Ultimately, at the end of the day, now, because the FBI is investigating, they're like, hold on, we take it pretty seriously, and we're going to fully cooperate with the law enforcement agencies to ensure any misuse is thoroughly investigated. Which is funny that it's coming out after, the FBI has got like court orders to take down entire domains. And again, me just speculating kind of over here when the IRS and the IRS criminal division and the FBI are working on something, I'm going to reasonably imagine that they have more information that they haven't come out with yet. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to look good for a company like Alarum or NetNut, for crying out loud, right? But the reality of it is that when you purchase a fucking shady little cheapo device to like browse like the internet or like watch a few movies on the internet, or maybe, for a lot of people get access to like free television, a lot of those scumbags will oftentimes sell you a hacked device or I guess you could say a already pre-infected device with this connection in place, and they might be actually making money off of you and basically making you sit in this web of, again, not being safe on the internet, right? And for a lot of people that are really careful, right, you might have like a fucking girlfriend or a wife or like a parent or somebody in your house that might have bought this shit and plugged this in somewhere in their room. And I feel like if you do have this kind of stuff, you might want to have to talk to them. Maybe it might be better to like purchase something a little bit more legitimate, something, or maybe if you can take their device and flash it with like official stuff that doesn't contain the filthy little nut, if you will, right? It's a bad nut, boys. It is what it is. But yeah, I saw this the other like day and I was just like, there is no fucking way this is a thing. But in reality it is, right? And their shares have been plunging because ultimately at the end of the day, the feds are going in this pretty fucking hard, as is Google, as is anybody, right? Because, at the end of the day, we want to stop criminals and bad people, okay? And it doesn't matter. A company like Alarum or a company or like a subsidiary like NetNut, at the end of the day, companies like this, in my opinion, are not companies that I'm ever a fan of. I don't think it should be okay to, without people's consent, have them be part of these like effective botnets around the world. Now, obviously, a lot of the work that I think NetNut does do is consensual, right? Meaning that maybe there are, like, if you download an application on like, say your television, so to speak, right? Even official applications, you think, they may be loaded with some of this proxy stuff. So you gotta be very careful when you're fucking downloading shit, agreeing to any term. Because there's a good chance that if you're part of any of these networks, you might be exposing yourself into being part of a giant, unwitting criminal operation. Because these networks are so big and the access to them is kind of sold piecemeal that criminals buy this shit all the time to be able to keep themselves pretty safe online at your behest. But yeah, at the end of the day, Google has significantly degraded their network, right? Reduced the available pool by millions. Again, it's not a dead network, but reducing it by millions, according to Google, is some pretty impressive shit right here, right? Now, at the end of the day, they've also said, in addition to selling access to the network under the NetNut brand, NetNut has a robust seller program that allows white labeling of its network. Google has high confidence that many popular residential proxy brands are in fact just white labeling the NetNut. They literally call it a botnet here, which, good job, Google, I guess. While we expect this disruption to have a larger ripple effect across the ecosystem, observations after the disruption of IPEDIA prove that individual networks do appear resilient. What we have observed is that when faced with the degradation of their own botnet, proxy operators begin buying capacity from their competitors, effectively becoming a reseller. We recognize that creating a lasting disruption in this fluid ecosystem means they gotta scale that shit up and target infrastructure of several of these interconnected operators, right? So it's a huge business, man. It really fucking is. And the reality of it is, it's crazy how this happens pretty openly. Like, again, you can go to their website and, purchase access to it right here. Some would think, man, this seems illegal, right? But I guess the reality of it is not really, okay? If you're an Israeli company, I guess you can sell access to this, without really thinking. It's crazy stuff, man. It really is. But yeah, the NetNut botnet was basically ripped apart a little bit. And a company associated with it doesn't exactly look like they're doing too fucking great. But anyways, that being said, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you learned something today. Hopefully, if you are part of the nut, it's time to start getting the fuck out of it, right? At the end of the day, listen, if you're somebody that wants to watch a game of FIFA on the internet, maybe it's better to pay for like an official streaming service for like, I don't know, the month, versus trying to be, smart and saving a whole bunch of money by thinking you're pirating it when you just spent for the cheapest option and you bought an Android TV box from like the cheapest fucking dude imaginable. And that cheap guy probably loaded it with malware and is using you as a mark. Simple as that. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and I'm out. Fucking Israelis, dude. Goddamn. Jesus Christ, these companies need to be stopped. All right, and it seems like the FBI is doing it. We'll see.